What's up, man?
Not much.
It's been a while.
Get right into it.
Yeah. It's been a while since we've been on the mics here, but had a fun month or so building out our new website, going to NextConf, doing all sorts of stuff. So Thanksgiving week here, got some family coming in, but figured we would hop on and talk about what we've been working on. So
yeah.
You were just telling me a fun story.
Yeah.
Would be a good way to start.
Before we get into this, I was reading this post on Hacker News. Pretty cool, like debugging story here. So, guy buys a vacation for his family online, pretty expensive vacation. And after he buys it, he gets a call from his bank. And the bank says, it's your fraud department. You just spent a lot of money on this website. We just want to verify it's you. And he says, yep, it's me. They say, okay, just one more thing. We noticed you have TeamViewer installed on your computer. For those of you that don't know, TeamViewer is like this remote desktop application, and it's used by a lot of like scammers, because if you install it on your computer and a scammer has like the access code to access your TeamViewer instance, they basically get root on your computer. And they can.
So it'd be like them having like screen control privilege in like a tuple or something.
Exactly.
Okay,
It'd be like if anyone could just open up your tuple, like TeamViewer.
They can do whatever they want.
Exactly. It's like a remote desktop application.
Yeah.
It has.
They still have to know your password if like they got prompted or something like that.
There's like a TeamViewer API key or something like that gives you. But the scammer is like,
they're on your computer acting like you.
Yeah. So this bank fraud department is basically hyper alert right now because this guy just spent a lot of money and he has TeamViewer on his computer.
Okay.
And by the way, TeamViewer has a lot of legitimate use cases.
Yeah.
Like, so the guy says, oh no, I need TeamViewer for work. I work in IT and I often have to help people like debug their computers, part of my job. And the bank says, okay, no problem. Hang up, transaction goes through. And then like a few hours later, the guy's like, wait a minute. I bought the vacation on a website. How the hell did the bank know that I had TeamViewer installed on my computer? And so there's a way.
How did they know?
Crazy. So I had to read the comments.
Because they're only getting a request from like whatever, myspecialvacation.com.
Well, the
right. That's the only information the bank had about the charge was like the charge request from. Right. Okay, myvacation.com wants to charge you $3,000.
Sure. But like if you were to use like Stripe is going to install JavaScript on your checkout form, and that Stripe JavaScript is going to do a bunch of fraud checks. So it's fair to say that like the bank knows what's in the web browser. But like the bank can't see the files on his computer. The web browser is like completely sandbox, safe security environment. And the fact that like the fraud department can say, hey, we noticed you have this program on your computer.
Right.
So like it's fair to say that the bank through like, whatever the payment processor is, somehow got information that heightened the chance of fraud.
I see.
So expensive purchase and TeamViewer.
Yeah.
So how did they discover TeamViewer, given that they only saw there's only a browser request?
How do they do it?
So yeah, it's crazy. So TeamViewer happens to install certain fonts when you install the program, and then you can use a JavaScript API to check if a font is available. And so if you know that TeamViewer is like one of the only programs, actually TeamViewer installs their own custom fonts, their own specific fonts.
Oh, wow.
So you can have a JavaScript API.
See if you have this font downloaded on this machine.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then they have TeamViewer. It's kind of crazy.
That is crazy.
And given that TeamViewer is so often used for fraud,
right.
It's not its only use case, but it is often used for fraud.
It's funny because
really creative. It's a really creative security check.
Yeah.
Like really creative.
Yeah. It reminds you, like, I remember guy we used to work with at TED used to say, like, security is, it's a spectrum. It's a continuum. There's no such thing as like secure and insecure. There's just not. Like when you think about security, but when you learn about it, you usually do think about it as black and white. Did you lock the front door? Yeah, it's secure. You didn't lock it. It's not.
Yep.
But this is not actually a security leak, but it is a vector in a sense that it reveals more information than you would expect. Like there's nothing private about what fonts you have except for this case where it's like, actually it is, because it's a good enough proxy for whether this piece of software is installed. What if there was some like adult, whatever that leak, the adult service where you find out people to have an affair with? What was that website or whatever?
Ashley Madison.
Yeah, Ashley Madison. What if they did something similar, right? You could see how like something like that would be.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean?
I'm saying it's just a great illustration of this point that security is a spectrum, because like, what if Ashley Madison installed a specific font?
Oh,
and like you actually aren't leaking. It's not a security leak in the sense that it's a mistake. But if you have the Ashley Madison font family on your computer, that means you've been to the website, Ashley Madison or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's just one of those cases where it's like all unit tests, no integration tests. Like, you know what I mean?
There's been, this has been patched in the browser, but I remember, 10 years ago, you could render a bunch of links and use CSS to style visited links. There's like a pseudo selector visited.
Yeah.
So you'd render purple links that are visited and blue links. And then you could figure out if the
they've
link
been
was
to their,
if the screen had purple on it, they've been to that website. And you could build up a whole profile on someone based off what
just render a bunch of like hidden links.
Render a bunch of hidden links and like, oh, you've been to ESPN.com, and
because the pseudo, the visited data wasn't accessible with JavaScript, but it was stylable with CSS. And then you could look at the color rendered in the browser by JavaScript.
Exactly.
And then now you're leaking their history.
Yeah.
So you can't do that anymore?
No, they patched this after people have shown this. But there's all
so you can't style visited links?
No, you can style visited links, but you can't read
the color
their color.
or
something like that. There is a way that patches this. I'm not sure what the exact patch is.
That's so interesting.
There's so many... I think even if you open up a private browsing window on your computer, you can get fingerprinted, and like they know it's you just based off
and like what websites you visited and stuff.
Yeah, they just know. They can give you like a tracking cookie, even though you're in a private browsing window. That cookie doesn't persist across sessions, but they can still give you like a cookie that identifies you. So even if you close the window and reopen it, they're just going to give you the same cookie.
Oh wow!
And they can use a combination of like fonts that are installed, internet speed.
Oh, I see.
The browser version you're using, the screen resolution you're using.
The information in the request.
And
accessible via JavaScript to say this is probably the same person.
Yep,
oh,
exactly.
Wow.
So every little bit of information just narrows down that set of people. And you can end up with just one... just like, the set of Sam based off all these different...
That's interesting. We were just talking about the Bology podcast with Lex Friedman, and he has a really interesting part of that talk where he's talking about how like our names are both give away too much information and also not enough. So like Ryan Toronto is not actually giving me enough information to... There's other Ryan Torontos or whatever.
You can't like send me money.
Yeah, exactly. I can't send you money with Ryan Toronto.
Because there's a million.
Whereas I could with like RyanToronto.eth, right? But it also gives me too much information, because if I start Googling Ryan Toronto, I can find your address. I can find all sorts of stuff.
Thanks for talking about this on the podcast.
And so people can get like stalked or whatever. People people care about, not like us, but like people can get stalked. And so he was talking about how our primary names, whatever he called them, government issued names, and like our social security number gives us too much, but the pseudonyms, there's like different levels where they give just enough. And this reminded me of it, because they were saying how basically you can, with enough of this information, you can basically do what you just said, which is like find out way more information than you'd want about someone. You're able to find more information about them than they would want. Whereas when they have something that is like a actual pseudonym platform, like an ETH thing or whatever, you can't tie it back to Ryan Toronto or your social security number. So you don't know anything else. They literally couldn't find anything else about you that you didn't explicitly put on there, like how to send you money and how to send you email or whatever it is, and which like whatever network state you belong to or whatever it is, right, for the discussion. But that's pretty interesting. Man, I was thinking, listening to that podcast, like if you happen to just fall in love with cryptography and been like a professor or a student of it, or like had it be a focus of your open source work, and then all this stuff happened like 10 years ago, man, did you hit the freaking jackpot? Because it sure seems like it's more relevant than ever.
Yeah.
And like cryptography has always been important.
Well, there's way more jobs now. There's just
way more stuff. There's just so much more, right? Like you could basically, like when I started learning programming, like, oh yeah, cryptography is how private public key encryption work. Okay, I don't really have to know that. I can just use GitHub. But like now, if you know how cryptography works, you have all these other things going on. It's just pretty fascinating. You know, I don't think someone would have been able to predict that necessarily.
No, I don't think
you
so.
know?
But I also kind of feel the same way about us and the web.
Yeah.
Where when I started web programming, I just thought it was cool.
Yep.
I didn't think it was going to blow
This
up
seems
to what
more extreme to me, where it'd be like, let's say you knew, you know, something just super nerdy that all of a sudden turned out to be like totally mainstream and that like Tom Brady cares about. You know what I mean? Like if you're
not anymore.
Yeah, right. If you're a cryptography like person who can explain like encryption, you know, and like keys and stuff, that's like you became the most interesting person at the party.
Yeah.
You probably still won't be able to hold a conversation, but it just struck me, you know, listening to this guy talk. Anyways, pretty cool stuff. Cool, man. So yeah, we've been obviously doing a bunch of stuff. We have 6 videos up on our Framer Motion course on Build UI, and probably going to end up with 8 or 9 before that kind of series is done. We get to move on to our next series. But there's a bunch of folks on Build UI now who have watched the videos and like them and given us ideas for the next one. So I haven't like officially tweeted out about the whole course yet, I guess, but just been kind of talking about it here and there. But we think it'll feel good, you know, after the first course is done. We're starting to work on the second series. That's kind of when like my last email will go out about the Framer Motion course. For those of you maybe who have heard about the course but haven't been listening, like I originally was going to make a course for Framer Motion that was like a one-off thing, and we were eventually building towards a subscription site because we want to make lots of different series, and that's what we just jumped to. So right now there's about 6 videos on there. We just did parts 1 and 2 of a carousel, which is a pretty cool video, and lots of good like basic React lessons, takeaways from there as well. And we're going to do resizable panel next, and then like a calendar. So that's what we've been working on the content side. But today we want to talk about the actual website and this kind of problem we ran into. So we've been building out buildui.com as a Next.js app with a Hasura backend. So it's pretty standard like setup. You know, there's a front end and there's a database and it's a Postgres database. So it's kind of a pretty standard setup.
Why don't you just explain what Hasura is?
Yeah, Hasura is a GraphQL API on top of like a standard database, a relational database. So if you've never used Hasura before, you know, we used to build like Ember apps on top of Rails backends. Now we build React front ends. And instead of building the Rails backend where you kind of write all this controller code that access and mutate your data, Hasura kind of automatically does it for you. So it's kind of like just exposing your database via GraphQL API automatically, which is nice. And it's relationship aware. So we have users that have subscriptions and videos that belong to series. All of those things are like credible. You can create, read, update, delete them across a pre-generated GraphQL API, which is nice because then we can just do our work from either get server-side props in Next or from a client if we need to do work from the client. And we use Firebase to sign people in, and we link the Firebase users to our users in our backend. Mm-hmm. So we ran into this issue, which is actually has nothing to do with like this kind of front end, back end architecture that we have been doing for several years now. This issue was that we're building this content site. It's a media site, and we have these videos now. We have 6 videos in our first series. We also have another series from EmberMap, our previous content site that we're uploading and going to make available to Build UI members. And so we have like, let's say 12 videos on there. And when we add a video and publish it, the way this works, again, just like if you were like using a Rails app, you have like your development environment and your production environment. That's true for both the front end and the back end. And this is nice because when you are developing features, like we were working on our sign up flow, we can have Stripe, which is another service we use running in test mode. We can have our dev version of our Hasura backend that has users that are like fake users. I can sign up as, Sam Ford or something and just put in a fake email address and then go through the checkout flow and make sure everything works. And none of that affects production data. And that's like a best practice because you don't want your development environment to be like messing with production data. You want every developer to have their own kind of sandbox to play with. If they mess it up, they can blow the database away, recreate it, pull down like a version, or even use seeds to like seed it with like test data. And so that's kind of like where our process is at right now. That's how Ember Map worked. That's how like every app that we've worked on basically works. That's
most
apps,
dev tools work this way. You get a dev sandbox and then you deploy to production, and everything is different.
Right.
But it's all the same code. The code is the same. Just
the code is the same and the data storage is different. And one thing we realized as I guess this kind of started because we were talking about CMSs, since we've usually never used a CMS service before.
Oh, there's a lot of this goes way back. There's a lot of pain. I'm trying to remember what kicked this off. And I thought part of it was just wanting to not rebuild some of those things that we like, the admin stuff that we built in EmberMap. No.
Is it static stuff?
No. It's so with EmberMap we had multiple Rails environments, development and production.
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen is we would spend a lot of time, making sure the production site looked good. So for every video that's posted, we have a description. We have, there's videos with variable length. They're actual real videos, with a real video player hosted on Amazon. But in the dev environment, like I was just working on dev features, like, make sure the video can play, make sure we're tracking when the video ends and so on. And so I just had a bunch of dummy videos there. I just had a bunch of test videos, and it was so painful to work on because you load up your development environment and it's nice that you have your own sandbox to play in, but the sandbox isn't realistic.
Yeah.
Like none of the toys.
I'm trying to remember the very first thing that led us to talk. Was it that? I thought there was something else.
So that was a huge pain point.
Yeah.
And so with EmberMap, what I did is I wrote this thing, and I think a lot of people end up writing their own thing that looks like this.
Yeah.
Where they go to production and basically download all the production data and then seed it into their dev environment, but seed it in a safe way. So if they like delete something, it doesn't then go like delete the file on S3 that their production dev server is looking at.
Right.
So that's pretty painful. And when we were working on Build UI, we have this dev instance and then we have the production instance. And I was adding some EmberMap videos to the dev instance, as well as adding the Framer Motion videos to the dev instance. Mm-hmm. The dev instance has like auth behind it. So like you can't view a video if you're not authenticated.
Mm-hmm.
When we first launched Build UI, the videos were just in HTML.
Right.
You could toggle CSS class to see them. Can't anymore though.
Yeah.
So we were adding these to the dev instance, and then I kind of had this like flashback of, oh no, what happens when we go put these on prod? Yeah. What happens when we go put these on prod? We're going to have to like copy everything over. And now our dev instance is just going to drift from our prod instance. And like, are we just going to keep these in sync? Is this going to be like a huge pain? Because like, think about like your publishing process. You're going to make sure the video looks good before you like actually publish it. So that means making it work in dev.
Right.
Getting all the data in, writing all the summaries and all that. And then you go to publish a video. Now you got to do the same thing again for prod. You got to copy all that data over. Huge pain in the ass.
Right. Yep. And it reminded me when I worked at TED Ed, actually, which is a similar website. It's a content, driven website, media website, that we had the same problem. And working on things locally, a lot of times you'd pull the latest code, and you'd be working with videos from 6 months ago. It's like a bunch, like hundreds of videos on there, but they were like old. And sometimes there's features that interact with the content in a certain way, like how old it is or whatever. So you really want to pull the latest version, kind of like you end up basically doing that, which is a huge bummer because it just doesn't seem like So you have these two databases, production and local, and you want it separate for what the reason you were saying, which you want to be able to go to town on it. But what we realized through all this discussion and reflecting back on other apps we've worked on is that the content is really not environment specific. If I'm working on a feature, like you said, I want to see the feature with what will be on the website, and that's going to be using the same content library. Yep. So the videos and the series are this environment independent set of data, whereas the users and the subscriptions and the teams and the credit cards are specific to the environment. Those should be independent. And it was kind of like an aha moment, but it was like, man, this would make things way nicer, because now I can go and create a new video in like this single source of content, the content layer, and see it in production. If I wanted to unpublish it, it's not published yet. I could preview it if I'm an admin. And I could also do that locally. So I could create the same, if I wanted to develop a feature against what it looks like to preview an unpublished video, then I could have an unpublished video, right? Like, let's just say it's in the queue for like a week or whatever, and I want to tweak something about, I can pull dev and do that, and it's going to be pulling the same thing. So that's pretty awesome.
It's so awesome. It also just removes surprises.
Yeah. It was a huge pain in the butt to work on this on TED-Ed when the database is just another thing. It was nice to have the database, obviously, for user accounts, being able to run seeds, run tests, say, log me in as an admin, log me in as a lesson creator, log me in as a viewer. All that you still want to do, because I can seed a subscriber to Build UI and see what the site looks realistically from their perspective. But I can't seed fake videos with like lorem ipsum and see what the site looks like with series that don't exist, with artwork that's like generated. That we've done that for Emmermap. We did that at TED-Ed, and it's just extra work to try to like.
It's uncanny. In the same way, it's uncanny. It sounds good, but exactly. Then when you view it, it's not the app that you're working on.
It's not.
You don't trust it.
You're not building a Build UI for an arbitrary, like, n different sets of content, or a TED-Ed, whereas you are doing that for the users. Like, you should be able to run this app and have like end users. Yep. But there's only one version of the content library that's going to be there, and everything from the layout and the homepage and all sorts of things are going to be tied to the specific content library that exists at a given point in time. Mm-hmm. So it shouldn't be something that's kind of an interesting way to think about it. Whereas like these are just videos as a table in our database, and so is users, but they're actually two different things, and one should be dependent on the environment and one shouldn't. And so we're talking about making basically like a CMS, our own CMS, which could be several things. It could be a service like a Contentful or a Sanity, or it could just be like another Hasura instance. I think we're probably going to use something like a Sanity, and especially because we build most of the pages in our site, at least the ones that depend on content at build time, then it kind of makes a lot of sense to use something like that, because we're not even introducing like a runtime dependency there to the site. Totally. So that was pretty exciting. And I'm looking forward to that. So let's talk about like the architecture, I guess, a little bit.
So one of the nice things about when you have like a Rails database per environment is that it's really easy to control access in and out of that environment. So like, should I have access to this video? Well, the Rails app is going to check if you have access. And if you do, it's just going to read the video data out of the database. But now you kind of you can't just go to your CMS and say, hey, can I watch this video? Because like, if we're using like Sanity,
it's outside of they don't know what a subscription is.
CMS. Yeah. Right. They don't, exactly. They don't know what Build UI is. Right. They don't know what a subscription is.
Most of these services have like a single API key that you use to make it so that you can read or whatever.
From what I looked at when I was exploring this, it's like there's two API keys, one for writing, one for reading. So you give your your build time tool to read API keys.
Or your server, right? You're doing,
Yeah,
the point is
yes.
you're doing it from a trusted source.
Yes, exactly.
It's a trusted server.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so our browsers that are on our website can't just go pull data from the CMS,
Right.
which is kind of a little tricky because like one of the things these CMSs advertise is just it's so easy to query.
Right.
And we also want, I think there were a few times where it's not just build time. We want like dynamic fetching and auth. So like if you're actually getting a video file,
Right.
we want that stored. We want some reference to that in the CMS.
Right.
And we want to make sure not just anyone can get it.
Right. So the way our pages work is like the thumbnail and the description and the title are public, and that constitutes like most of the page. So that's why we chose to build time it, because it's the same whether you logged in or not. If you're not logged in, you see like an overlay that says join now to access this video. If you are logged in, you don't see the overlay, you get the summary, and we fetch the video on the client so that, again, like you can see that page immediately, and then before you even click the play button, we've gone ahead and fetched the video. But that uses the token, like the user session from the client. And so the question now is how to use that to fetch, to make sure that you can only get the iframe of the actual thing if you're logged in.
If you actually
have a subscription.
Yeah, if you actually have a subscription. And so like there's a few ways, but like they all kind of like boil down to like you need some sort of proxy that sits between the browser that's making the request and the CMS. And so the proxy, it goes to the browser says, hey, I want this video. It goes through the proxy checks and says, okay, let me look it up. Let me make sure you have a subscription. If you do, okay, I'm going to go fetch that data from the CMS for you and give it back to you. If you don't, you respond with 403, 401, whatever.
Right.
You don't have access to this. But then that kind of creates a new problem is how do you build this proxy? Like, what is this? Is this its own little app? I think what we landed on was Next API route.
Yeah.
Something super simple that's just
is nice.
Do an auth check.
Right.
And then go off. Yeah. Gonna have to deal with that cold start.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the problems that we've run into many times with Build UI is like the API routes that are built into Next.js are really nice for doing things like, pinging Stripe, building an endpoint that can be used as a webhook. So when you go to Stripe to check out, you send the email that you used and a subscription back to our system. We have a webhook waiting to listen to that. That's right in our Next app. It's all one app, which is really nice as opposed to kind of how we did it, in the past where you'd have a backend and front end, separate repos, separate deploys. Is a beautiful thing about Next. But we're deploying to Vercel, which we like a lot of the features in Vercel, but the API endpoints have a cold start because they use serverless functions to deploy them. The edge stuff is supposed to help with that, but that's kind of experimental. So we've run into issues with that. We're just using the kind of standard thing, but it does sometimes cause an issue. So building the build time public stuff is going to be great, I guess, because it doesn't matter if it cold starts during a build. Like you're just doing that to build the pages.
I won't even go through the API.
The
build process.
The build process
directly to the CMS.
That's right. But fetching the video at runtime or anything else at runtime does need to do that. I think we have some redirects that are using Edge.
Yeah, we have a few things.
But this is the area where it's kind of usually the CMS have like an SDK that you import. It might be node dependent, and so you might not be able to use Edge for that stuff. So we'll have to see. Yeah, that is the most convenient. Dropping an API endpoint in to act as a proxy to these things is like super convenient.
Yeah.
The other idea would be to have a separate service that's long running, deployed somewhere that we go through. But then it's like you have to coordinate.
Now you're responsible for deploying a new service, another app. So
yeah, and they would have to have access to like our Hasura service and users to make sure that the user's logged in. So that feels like a step too far. Yeah. The API route definitely is the easiest.
One thing I looked for, and I don't think this exists, and if anyone knows of anything that does this, I'd love to hear, but this idea that your users or browser can talk directly to the the CMS service, and they'll send over a JWT, and that JWT will have like custom claims in it.
Oh, wow.
Say like, oh, I have access to all the videos, so let me query any video. Hasura has this sort of auth process built in. They also have another process where there's a webhook. So when you talk to Hasura, before Hasura returns any data, it goes off to another webhook that you're running.
Verify the header.
Yeah, and basically say
whatever.
like, who is this person that's asking for this, and can I send this to them?
Right.
And so that would be cool if like a CMS service had that, where
you get a JWT and then you can go straight to the CMS basically.
Yeah,
from the browser.
You can do like, you can sign the JWT, and the JWT can have custom claims.
Right.
And so like there's a bunch of like like Hasura I think does a great job at this, where they will validate the JWT that you send to them.
Do they do that on every request?
There's different rules. So you can say that if I've validated this person before, don't validate them again for X amount of time.
15 minutes or something.
Yeah. It's kind of tricky. Also, JWTs are like, they're like short-lived, but you can't invalidate them. Or if you do build an invalidation system, you're almost like
defeating purpose.
Yeah, exactly. You're undoing a lot of the benefits.
The purpose is that you wouldn't have to use you have a token, you have a JWT token that's good for 15 minutes and lets you avoid checking
ever having to verify request, because it's the signature is right there in the payload.
Right.
Yeah, it would be cool as we see these, like as we use more and more services. If there were more options for integrating auth, so that your users could talk directly to these services and pull the data they need.
Right.
Having a proxy though is pretty nice, because it does let you, it's like what do I always say, like BFF
flight controller,
air traffic controller, where it can kind of,
it's
it
nice to know it's the only way to get to those services.
Yeah, and
through that.
For Build UI, it's not like generic. It's like, okay, I need to go check. Does this user have a subscription? Are they on a team that has a subscription?
Right.
Okay. What video do they want? Oh, I know how to best get that video from the CMS. This is how this is how we're organizing the data. Because like, if you think about it, these CMSs are like document stores. They don't know that we're putting videos in there. They don't know that like we might have like pointers over to Mux or Vimeo.
Right.
And so having something that our own little middle layer that can kind of glue all this together, I think is a nice thing. And it's also just like one entry point.
Yeah.
So we can, swap stuff in and out of there.
Yeah. It's nice to be able to look under API and see our Stripe webhook and, eventually video processing or whatever it is,
It is funny that if you aren't using an API route, this somehow gets like way more scary and more expensive, from not like in dollars, but in terms of complexity.
States.
Just you now have another app you're running that you're deploying if you're not using an API route.
You're also not talking directly to the service. You're saying if you had another app.
Yeah, if you had another app.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very easy to say, oh, just set up a proxy, and then 6 months later find yourself in a world of like you have 8 different microservices. Yeah. Which is something we want to avoid, because that we just don't need that. So there are some
the way to go for sure.
But I think that's a detail that's very easy to gloss over. Like I think that's a detail here that like
if you were in a team, you could see that recommendation getting like.
I don't even think this would be on the table if there weren't API routes.
Right.
So
for us,
for us,
100%.
But that seems very minor.
No, yeah,
in terms of architecture, but it's actually
it actually is like a microservice. It's the Stripe. There's a node server running, waiting for requests about Stripe, listening to Stripe from our site, and that has to run separate from like our front end, which is just. But the fact that literally they're in the same code base makes that like reduces the cost down a ton.
They have the exact like the deployment
overhead.
A black box for both. They're both deployed together. It
makes it really nice for sure. No, I've been really happy with the Stripe stuff so far. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, Stripe stuff's amazing.
It's amazing, and it's like we're using the hosted version, and we enabled like a couple people asked for annual pricing. We just like flip a switch. I was amazed we didn't have to write any code for that. That was incredible. And that just is added as an option on the checkout. thing. So services are pretty dope. Pretty cool. Hard to test still. That's another thing about this is that
you're more you have like you're more in the services pool than I am. I think I'm a little I think Stripe deserves a ton of credit for what they built. I don't think that's easy to replicate.
Yeah, they're like the best version of it.
Yeah. I think that
it's true. If you pull out the videos into like a CMS, my folks are coming in for a visit for Thanksgiving. Nice. I'm excited.
Get them on the pod.
Yeah. If you pull the videos out, it's true now. Like you have we're kind of making a new little service, or it's just a separate service that the app is talking to that is not spun up and torn down with each environment. So if you think about writing a test, now the test, if it interacts with a video, the service has to be out for the test. But we're kind of already there because we use Stripe and we use Vimeo. So if you want to run, this is like, again, going back to the trade-off of services. If you have like an app that literally just uses Rails, Postgres, and you're running it, then it's like the airplane test. You can just run it and you have like a sandbox, a new environment for your whole thing.
But
But since we're already using Vimeo and Stripe, we're already kind of beyond that point in the sense of if you run our test suite, it's going to be hitting like Vimeo or like our test Stripe account, right? And so now it will also be hitting the CMS, which is going to be whatever, like our sanity thing. But that is a trade-off in the sense that we can't test it. We can't say, given a CMS with one video, what does it look like? Given a CMS with an unpublished video, what does it look like?
But I think you're making too many excuses for the other services because Stripe nails this story. Stripe has an awesome testing story, and you can disconnect your internet and you can test Stripe, which is unbelievable. And so I think that
you couldn't test like the webhook stuff, could you?
Yeah,
with the emulator thing.
Yeah, you can run Stripe. You can run Stripe.
Yeah,
and also too they have also a webhook testing tool that says, okay, pretend a user just signed up as a subscription and just hit my webhook.
Yeah.
And so
but that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's a cost to like for us moving to a CMS for the content,
for sure.
Which is that we basically can't test it anymore because you can't say, show me what the website looks like with an unpublished video, unless we like create an unpublished video on the CMS,
which I don't think we're going to do.
Not going to have it there forever, right? You could imagine us doing what just not going to do that. You know, maybe you get to a point where you that's just the sprinkler system outside. It's no biological things happening in the room. No, maybe get to a point where you actually do want, in the same way we have like a test Stripe account, we want like a test CMS account with like one published video, one series that's like incomplete or whatever. I mean, probably not. Again, this is like, but this, I'm just explaining trade-offs, is that like, if you wanted to write a test that says, I want to view what the site looks like, given I have 2 series, one with 5 published videos, the other one has 2 published and 1 unpublished. But then you're back to this world where you're like making a dynamic site that is able to work with like any configuration of media. Whereas the whole reason we're extracting a CMS in the first place is because we want it to work with a single set of media, which is the videos that are in our library. So I think that's going to be a better trade-off. It's just that you have to acknowledge, like, if you're going to interact with these things during tests, you're going to be interacting with like the single live version that's hosted, which has been fine so far. The Stripe stuff. Do we run the Stripe stuff locally during tests, or do we hit the test account that's hosted?
No,
we hit the test account that's hosted.
I have a bunch of different tests.
Some of them hit the test account that's hosted, locally, which is fine.
Yeah. The test account.
And when we run NPM run dev, we are pointing to the hosted test version of our account, which is fine. Correct. Which in the past we wouldn't have wanted. We would have preferred to have things that run without needing an internet connection, but it's a trade-off and it's totally fine. We always have an internet connection,
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sweet. So yeah, I would love to hear also if anyone has experience with this, if they've run into situations where like some partition of their database has data that's really not environment dependent. That's like media that should be the same for every environment, and you find yourselves copying. Because if I think back again to like the TED Ed stuff, I wouldn't have copied it down just to get the users that were in production. I was only copying it down to get the content.
The data, yeah.
In fact, I didn't want the users that were in production.
Yeah.
I wanted to seed users myself to have representative different groups, individuals, educators, teams, which is what we would want to do.
Right.
So if you didn't happen to have a team on Build UI, but we supported teams, if you were writing your tests or building locally or developing the team dashboard, you would want a team, right? So you would seed that yourself. You want control over that, but you still want the media library to be the same. So I'd be curious if anyone else has run into this. I'm sure people who are familiar with this problem, if they've been working on like media sites like this. It's more for things that are public, right? The videos are the same for everybody. If you're working on accounting software, it doesn't matter. It's all environment specific, pretty much, right? So that's pretty interesting.
I like what you said. We're building a website for the Build UI video library, so it has to feature the Build UI.
Yeah.
We're not building a website for an arbitrary video library, and that tool would look completely different.
Exactly. That would exactly,
different.
and that way that one you would want it to be separate. Yep, that's 100% right. Cool. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap it. It's Tuesday, November 22nd, so let's probably get this out sometime in the next week. But it's Thanksgiving here, so
yeah, have a good Thanksgiving.
Have a good Thanksgiving if you're all about turkeys and that sort of thing. If not, I'm sure it'll still be a nice week to enjoy. But yeah, we got a lot more stuff kind of in the backlog to talk about. So maybe we'll see you guys again next week.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.